I'm very, very pleased to be here, sending Jill and Kathleen and the board of CNMF and all of you thanks for this opportunity. This is my 5th year to do this role, and I looked forward to it so happily, and I'm very grateful to be here. In the 1870s, we hear that Nightingale was saying, well, gee, you know, in 1870, the nurses weren't as what she wanted them to be. She said it would take about 150 years for nurses to become who she was envisioning. Well, just for the midwives here, she was thinking nursing and midwifery was the same. She was, of course, very keen for everything that midwifery does. So if I'm omitting your name, it's not because we're forgetting you. So 2020 is a potent milestone for now and for beyond. For many, many years, I personally, and I know other Nightingale scholars were saying, gee, the bicentennial year is an important year, 2020. We're looking to 2020 now. We're here. Now what? Now what? But before we talk about that, let's do some looking back, as I was asked to do. While we were remembering Nightingale's bicentenary, 7 slides are my attempt at briefly representing each of your regions with stories that start near the time of Nightingale's death. Canadians, can we have the Canadians say hi? There.
Hi.
Hi. Lady Ishmael Aberdeen was a wife of a prominent Governor General in Canada, and she was Florence Nightingale's close friend and Queen Victoria's close friend. And she knew from her work as the wife of the Governor General of Canada that nurses were deeply needed in rural areas, and she put together the Victorian Order of Nurses. From my understanding, because it was a direct connection to Nightingale, that the district nursing concept that Nightingale had, Lady Aberdeen brought it specifically to rural Canada, and in particular to the Klondike area where there was a major typhus epidemic, and that's how the Victorian nurses began. Victorian nurses have been in Canada since then. It's a very wonderful way to remember Nightingale's specific thinking about district nursing. Now, the Australians. You want to hear from the Australians? Hello? We can't do a remembering about this without noticing that the nurses in World War I were very, very important in their participation. It was a major shift in nursing because of the war. And the Australian nurses and other nurses, Canadian nurses, American nurses, I believe New Zealand nurses, were involved. I'm bringing this one story, this nurse named Pearl Cockrill, who was actually stationed at a hospital tent in France during World War I, and she was doing the night shift when that entire enclave was bombed, and instead of fleeing for her own safety, she stayed in that bomb tent to look after the people that were still there, and she received a medal, and actually a couple of medals for her work. Those are the medals that she received, and I'm bringing you this quote because she wrote to her mother after all of this that she knew she was going to get the medal, and she was complaining that her uniforms were all tattered from her duties, her war duties, and she was complaining that she didn't have a new dress to wear to put the medals on. She was going to have to wear her old battle-worn uniform, and she said, well, but then I guess I better not grumble about that. Barbados now, the Caribbeans. How many Caribbeans are here? Hello?
Hello!
Barbados, this woman, Dame Ruth Nita Barra, a leading Caribbean nurse who was so influential that she was working nationally and internationally. Eventually, she became the Governor General of Barbados. Now, in my research, I'm not sure that there's ever a higher ranking nurse in the whole world. Perhaps there's been a nurse who's a president, but a Governor General is a representative of the Queen. As you know, that the top ranking person in Barbados is the Governor General. This nurse, yeah, any of you from the Caribbean, did you know her? Okay. Ah, how nice for you. And later, she took on global responsibility to be working in the emerging United Nations Women's Movement and Women's Summit. She was the chair of the summit in Nairobi. And so, kudos to the Caribbean. And I'm very grateful to say that my research pans out with your Pakistan presentation. I know about the Aga Khan Foundation because the Aga Khan is very strong in Canada, so I knew to go and look for the story about the Aga Khan University School of Nursing and the midwifery work there. And I started with this picture from Pakistan, but realized that the Aga Khan schools are also in Kenya, in Uganda, and Tanzania. I believe there's one in the UK, and you can see there, it's a very significant thing. And I wanted to be sure, I didn't know that there would be such a good, strong Pakistan presentation just before mine, but I wanted to be sure that the Islamic part of the world is well represented in this slide. South Africa, South Africans, Denosale people, hello! Hi. Now, I know that there are about 10 African nations represented here today, and I would have loved to have given you all a slide, but I knew that Denosa would be an outstanding example for you. I was able to ask Femika Gwala to tell me about how Denosa was literally involved in the anti-apartheid movement and made a huge difference in that movement. This is what Femika says about the picture of Nelson Mandela. Mandela's photo was taken on the day we launched Denosa. And the t-shirt he was wearing was one that was being distributed to everyone. He was happy to put it on. And it was a highlight for us to have him share his concern with us, and a lot of lobbying happened behind the scenes. They were able to twist his arm, so Femika said, so that he would come to their Denosa meeting rather than to some medical clinic in some province far away. And that he blessed their work, and she said without that opportunity to be with Mandela and be inspired by him, that Denosa wouldn't be what it is today, a very, very strong example of the power of nursing, what Nightingale envisioned for Africa. Kudos to South Africa. Okay, now to the UK and to Europe. There are many UK people here, but I also wanted to say great to the Maltese and Cyprus nurses here that this represents Europe and not just the UK, but also to say that the UK Department of International Development sent this woman, Lindsay Phillips, and many others to work with the people in Bangladesh. I'm assuming that the Bangladesh nurses know about this also, the Ministry of Health, to look after the diphtheria epidemic that happened among the Rohingya refugees in 2017. And because the UK nurses and others came to be in Bangladesh, that they only had just a few deaths and 5,000 cases, but the epidemic was stopped because of this kind of work. Kudos to the UK and to Europe. Okay, India. I know also that there are many of you, Bangladesh and Sri Lanka and others. Hi, India. And so this slide is for India and also for all of the Asian people here. For many, many years, and I learned from the Indian delegation that since 1971, the President of India provides a Florence Nightingale Medal to deserving Indian nurses every year in Delhi. And this was developed by the Trained Nurses Association of India that was began in 1908. And just to say on the side, before we carry on with this slide, the Trained Nurses Association of India, their headquarters is sited on Florence Nightingale Lane in New Delhi. So now this president must have been briefed by nurses, because here he says that nurses are nation builders. Nurses are nation builders. What a wonderful concept for us to be thinking about who we are and our value. And also to speak just briefly about Lini Pathusi, the nurse who was serving in an area where there was a NIGH epidemic. She died of that epidemic. And so she received a posthumous award from the president. She received the posthumous Florence Nightingale Medal for India. Now, that brings me to the next slide about the obvious Florence Nightingale medals that the Red Cross provides. Hundreds by now to many, many nations. I did a lot of research on this, and I decided that instead of naming the many nurses who are alive, also from the Commonwealth, that I would just name 3 of the most prominent ones who have recently passed in their service, who are Commonwealth nurses. This woman, Saifura Husani Ahmed Korsa, was kidnapped by the Boko Haram and used for ransom. And because it wasn't met, she was executed. And Kirsty Bowden was killed, actually in London. She rushed to a terrorist attack with a knife on the Westminster Bridge, and she was killed herself in that effort. And also this woman, Louisa Akavik from New Zealand, was kidnapped in 2013, and my latest study is that she has not been found. She was kidnapped by ISIS in 2014. So just to bring these posthumous Florence Nightingale Red Cross medals, all of these people, Red Cross volunteers, and just to say that to appreciate these commitments. I'm sure you can imagine these people making these commitments, and to appreciate what it is that nurses do for the suffering. Okay, now, here we are in 2020. We are the nurses and midwives that Florence Nightingale envisioned. What does that mean? What does that mean? And that was the question that I began to ask myself. What does that mean for me? And what might it mean for you? And how could I be sharing the wide range of ways that you might be answering that question yourself? We've heard a lot about in this conference, and we know now even more than before, because of the COVID virus, that we are all global citizens living in a global village, and healthcare professionals of all stripes, including all of us, are aware now that we have a global citizen perspective. And we have to consider that we are still working in our person-centered roles, our person-centered perspective, our person-centered focus. We are also expanding to population-centered perspectives that many others have taken on. We are gradually pulling that into our own work, and this, as you know perhaps better than I, is a very challenging way to look at things, given our already very, very difficult roles. Perhaps I find it very eerie to say about this picture that I grabbed this picture way before the COVID virus and before the cruise ships were carrying people who had to be quarantined on cruise ships. I find it very eerie that this picture actually predates the example now, the difficult times that we live in. And this is my only slide to touch on that, but I want you to know that this is to be very clear that you understand that I'm honoring what it is that we as nurses and midwives face every day across the world in high access situations and in low access situations. It's a challenging place to be. And one of the things that we know about this particular conference is that we come here to share and learn from each other. We come here to gain and regain our sense of perspective, to get renewed, and to honor the fact that that's one of our major needs, and this being here together is one of those ways that we do this. And then I began to think about helping you to see that our stories are perhaps early stories, even 150 years after Nightingale's early story, that we may indeed be like buds on the tree, and that our labors will be fruits far, far beyond what we can even know. That the fruits of our labors will be reaching way ahead into generations that go after us, even for you who are students, that what you are doing today will be making a difference 150 years from now. And also, using this analogy, that what you are doing may actually be planting vast orchards of health for the entire population of the earth. While we look at universal health care, and we must, because that is what we're tasked to do, Dr. Tedros of WHO said, that's why the year of the nurse and midwife, so that universal health care can be prominent. I would also urge you to think, I believe that we must go even beyond universal health care to advocate for what is required for a healthy world. And all of you, many presentations that I've been seeing, you're doing that. Just to know that that's what you're doing. You are advocating for a healthy world. And that caring and commitment is the stance that we deeply, deeply need for the whole human family and for the earth itself. Florence Nightingale saw these needs and addressed them, and countless others, including all of us, are continuing in that way. The 21st century may well be remembered as an historic time when caring and compassion stake the ground for what humanity can become. Today's global challenges will not be solved in a day or a year or even a generation, but our courage, our wisdom, our knowledge, our experience, our wisdom is what the world needs. And that we are planting vital seeds of what humanity can become. Imagine now. Some of you may remember that I brought this last time. We'll go through this together because this is one of the declarations that we're using to help us to hold our commitment to these ideas. Together with me, please. We, the nurses and concerned citizens of the global community, hereby dedicate ourselves to achieving a healthy world. We declare our willingness to unite in a program of action to share information and solutions to improve health conditions for all humanity, locally, nationally, and globally. We resolve to address personal practices and to implement public policy in our communities and nations, making this goal achievable and inevitable. Beginning today in our lives, in the life of our nation, and in the world at large. Again, with caring and commitment, bound towards the goal required for humanity. That slide isn't in the declaration, but it's a joy to hear you say, claim it, it's wonderful. 2020, what will we do with 2020? Who are we? Who will we be? And I decided in long meditation to say to you that you are on the vanguard. You are on the vanguard of what humanity can and must become. Thank you very much.
you very much indeed for those inspiring words and fabulous films. Thank you very much, Deva.